Good to see you. Welcome to the fifth of our series of videos on the Chronicles of Narnia, meeting Jesus in Narnia. The fifth book of the series happens at sea. It's entitled The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. In the previous book, Prince Caspian, helped by Peter, Edmund, Susan and Lucy, helped especially by Aslan, who represents Jesus, had come to take the throne that was rightfully his, and thus free Narnia from the tyranny of his uncle and make it a happy and blessed land again. When his uncle had been in power, or one of the ways in which he'd strengthened his hold on the land was by sending 7 noble lords off to sea on a journey that he hoped, and indeed it so proved, they would never return from. And at his coronation, Caspian, with Aslan's approval, had vowed that once things were settled and his reign well established, he would journey to sea to seek to discover those 7 lords, or at least find out what happened to them. And the Voyage of the Dawn Treader tells the story of that journey, a journey indeed that took them right to the very end of the world, in which Narnia is a country. It's a story, I'm guessing you'll realise from what I've just said, that obviously does not parallel any particular Bible narrative, and that takes us back to something I think I said at the first video. Often the Christian message in Narnia has to do with how Aslan interacts with people. In the story of his own mighty deeds, there are obvious parallels with Jesus. He's the creator, he's the one who died and rose again to rescue and redeem. He's the one at whose return the world comes to its conclusion. In the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, there's not necessarily an incident that mirrors anything we find recorded in the scriptures, but again there is Aslan's interacting with people that points to how Jesus interacts with people. One of the most striking incidences of that in the book concerns somebody who becomes a pretty central human character, actually, not only in this but in the remaining 2 books. Eustace, who is a cousin of Peter and Edmund and Susan and Lucy. And interestingly and amusingly, the book begins with this sentence: there was a boy named Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it. Lewis obviously had a bit of a sense of humour. And Eustace, certainly in the early part of the story, was a character whom you could hardly warm to at all. Ever complaining, ever moaning, entirely selfish, preoccupied with his own interests, an absolute nuisance to everybody. And that continued until well into their journey, I suppose. They came upon an island that was largely unknown. They had been in a storm for quite some time before that. They had to get disembarked and begin repairs. Indeed, they even needed a new mast on the boat and so on. And there was a whole lot of work to be done, and Eustace didn't want to play any part in that. So he snuck off to get some rest, and unbeknownst to himself, wandered into the pathway of a dragon that was actually just about to die, and indeed did die. And when heavy rain then came on, Eustace bolted for cover and fell asleep in that cover, which, as you might guess, turned out to be the lion's cave. When he awoke, he was no longer a boy. He had become a dragon, lying in a dragon's cave with, as Lewis says, dragonish thoughts in his heart, that is, thoughts of selfishness and disregard for others. He turned into a dragon. Eventually, he was turned back into a boy, and he was turned back into a boy, of course, you've guessed it, by Aslan. He met Aslan, well, he wasn't sure whether it was a dream or in reality, and he met Aslan this night, and Aslan instructed him to take off his skin and 2 or 3 times he did, but it never actually got him anywhere. He was making but a very little difference. No matter what he did, he was still a dragon. And then Aslan said, I'll have to do it. And putting his paws in deeper than Eustace imagined they could ever go, Aslan brought the dragon skin off and made him into a boy again. And the first person who Eustace encountered after this was his cousin Edmund, and he began to explain to him what had happened. After all this, says Eustace, after a bit the lion took me out and dressed me. Dressed you? Asked Edmund with his paws. Well, I don't exactly remember that bit, but he did somehow or other in new clothes, the same I've got on now, as a matter of fact. And then suddenly I was back here, which makes me think it must have been a dream. No, it wasn't a dream, said Edmund. Why not? Well, there are the clothes, for one thing, and you've been, well, undragoned for another. What do you think it was then? Asked Eustace. I think you've seen Aslan, said Edmund. Eustace and Lewis, I think, says this very thoughtfully, began to be a different boy after that. He still had bad days. His own self still came out from time to time. He still made mistakes, but he was being made new. He'd been changed, and that change more and more became evident. And so it is in the lives of Christian people. We can't change ourselves. We can't make ourselves new. Jesus must do that. And Jesus does it initially when we come to him at first. And the change that Jesus makes as he continues his work and as we by the Spirit's power cooperate with him, it goes on until one day in the world that's yet to be, we are all that he wants us to be. Beautiful story, isn't it? We can't change ourselves. We need Jesus to bring about the real change that we desperately need. Let's not try to make ourselves better. Let's look to Jesus and rely on him and walk in his way. God bless.